Hello, everybody. I'm Gladius Veritatis, joined again by Matthew. We are the Inquisitors. It's been too long, but life just does its thing in terms of scheduling and family trips. And just lifing, as they say. As you can see, I am outdoors today in the beautiful woods.
Yeah, it's nice.
Feels
It's
great
nice.
up here. Yeah, it's probably around 80, but nice gentle breeze. There's humidity, but it's certainly nothing oppressive like from my home state in Florida, which is fine with me. And, we're still getting some days in the 60s and some rain, which is the beauty of being this far north, at least most of the time. Sometimes it's a drawback. It just depends on your perspective. Yeah, June 9th. It's now been over a calendar month since the last tanker that left the Strait of Hormuz landed in California, I believe. And California gets almost all their oil to be refined over the ocean. Pipelines aren't necessarily a big part of their mix. So obviously, you might want to get a calendar if you live out there and just kind of mark it down. Tank bottoms approach for Europe, America, everywhere, frankly. Some places have already long been there. And you know what tank bottoms is, I imagine, just from reading stuff?
Do you mean that's when the tank runs out of fuel?
So let's say you put fuel in a tank, like the big containers. They don't drain them all the way down. They can't, because what happens is you put a bunch in there and things slowly settle to the bottom. And while some of those things can then be perhaps scraped out and used to make various byproducts, you can't bring any more out. Once you reach tank bottoms, you got no fuel unless you keep putting stuff in there. And anyway, the big wigs for Exxon and numerous other oil companies, shipping companies, whatever, are quite, blunt at this stage. Probably according to the script that, we're up against it. July, August, September at the very latest, depending upon what they're talking about and how things flow, where basically all of the band-aids on this mortal wound will be exposed as such. If you got goods in the back of the store, you can keep putting them out and it looks like, hey, things are normal. Well, what does it look like in the back? What does it look like at headquarters? How much is there to ship? How much fuel can you get to ship? I saw something yesterday about the Irish farmers fishermen are basically hanging it up. Why? Because all those boats run on diesel. And that's going to be true everywhere, right? Because all that stuff runs on diesel. Without diesel in the modern world, you got problems. It's no longer the modern world.
Yeah, it is the foundation of our whole civilization now, which is why Iran kind of is in the driver's seat. They're kind of in control more than Trump would ever like to admit, because they don't have to conquer us. They don't have to defeat the entire American military. Not at all. All they have to do is survive and keep some of their force projection intact, such that they can launch missiles and block the Strait of Hormuz and threaten Israel, threaten the U.S. forces in the region, and then they can basically hold the global economy hostage. Because remember, we're very interconnected. Of course, I say global economy tongue-in-cheek, the worldwide economy. We're very interconnected now. The world is a much smaller place than it was 150 years ago. You used to have a bunch of just smaller economies that had loose links with other outside economies. But now, if there's a shortage of oil in Europe, or diesel or fertilizer or anything else, instantly people in places that have plenty of those things have to pay more, because it's all on a global market. That's what they call it, the global marketplace. And they bid up the price of oil or the price of corn or whatever, and then everyone has to pay that going rate. So even if you're in the Midwest United States where they produce the corn, you're paying as much as some country that doesn't have any corn and has to import all of it, because they're both buying it from the same, universal worldwide market. where they bid it up and down. And of course, you got the middleman, the arbitrage, all the financiers doing their thing with the future.
Manipulating the snot out of it, right? It's like, they play the futures market largely with stolen money and drive things up and down at whim, and basically just leave the little guy hanging in the wind. They could work it to where the farmers who grow the corn can't even afford the corn that they grow. It's insane. And that's what they did in Ukraine, Soviet Russia, right? They were growing food. They just came and took it from them, and the farmers weren't allowed to eat it, even though it was their food that they grew on their land. But didn't stop tens of millions of them from dying. So tell us a little bit about your trip and maybe some thoughts you were recently having about things going on in Traddie-Land as a whole. Any kind of movements or talk.
Yeah, so I just took a little week-long trip up to one of the meccas of tradition, namely St. Mary's, Kansas, and it was fun. It was interesting. I got to go. I checked out the SSPX's grand structure, their Immaculata Church, which cost them north of 40 or maybe even $50 million. I know there was the initial estimate, and then I think it went up. So we don't.
So is that's on that? It's in that town or on that property?
Yeah, that's actually in St. Mary's, but then north of there, I was going to visit. Of course, I'm not with the SSPX anymore, so I was going to Bishop Zendejas to his chapel. So and he was blessing a new altar because
it's like just north of that or something.
Yeah, it's close by. It's basically kind of the outskirts, and I don't think it's any secret that he has a group there. So I think I can say that much. I don't want to.
Probably some refugees from St. Mary's, maybe.
Yeah, and there's just so many traditional Catholics in St. Mary's that you have pretty much every group there. You have the FSP, you have the SSPX. I'm pretty sure I didn't meet them, but I'm pretty sure Father Pfeiffer has a presence there. And of course, Bishop Zendejas, and of course any other group they're probably there too, because there's just so many traditional Catholics. Just to talk about what it was like, if you've never been there. Just the first thing you notice is how many traditional Catholics there are. You go to the grocery store and you see so many women in long dresses and skirts at the grocery store, which normally when I see, if I'm there, I'm usually with my kids. And by kids, I have mostly girls. So, I usually take my oldest 3 daughters these days when we go grocery shopping. My oldest son used to go, but now he's working and in college and everything. So he kind of aged out, as it were. So usually if I see across the way on the other side of the store, all the way down a hall, an aisle, if I see a lady in a long skirt, without even having to look closely, I'm like, oh, that's one of mine. It's one of my daughters. Yeah. I can almost say, hey, come here. Whereas in St. Mary's, you can't do that because chances are it's somebody else in a strange family that's not part of your family. Because it's weird because you're not used to that. I'm used to going out in public, but I'm not used to seeing so many traditional Catholics outside of church, outside of a get together at my house or something. So it's interesting in a good way. And, a lot of people say it's a good place to raise a family. And they were even, one gentleman was even telling me how it was particularly a good place to find work. Like there's good blue collar jobs there, and not just Onyx, but a couple other places that have jobs that pay like 70 or 80,000 a year or something, without, a big college degree. We're talking like, blue collar kind of jobs. And so a lot of people move there for that. And apparently just to be around so many traditional Catholics and things like their kids to have friends, for the schools, maybe when they're older to find spouses, all that kind of stuff. Others say it's a good place to move to when you're looking to find a spouse. Now, all that having been said, there are still downsides to it. It's not a Shangri-La. It's not heaven. You can't just slam the door. Okay, we're cozy now. The world's out there and we're in here. It's not quite that simple because there is still human nature. There's still the world, the flesh, and the devil. are very much
Sure.
St. Mary's as well. So as long as you realize what you're getting yourself into, and that it's not perfect, yeah, you can't knock a place that has so many traditional Catholics. I mean, as long as you acknowledge the slight artificiality of it.
Am I correct that there was also some sort of scandalous interaction between some clerics and children, or clerics and somebody? Not that I even want to get into it for more than 2 seconds, but
actually,
not that it changes everything. I'm just saying that's a perfect example.
I don't know about that. We could talk about the downsides of St. Mary's, but just briefly, the second place, and I mean distant second place, Mecca in the United States, I would say is Post Falls, Idaho. That one actually had a scandal. It was all over. I mean, CathInfo had a long thread on it.
Gotcha.
And that was actually children, like the boys were doing stuff to each other. Well, and there was a scandal, and I don't want to go into details about it.
Yeah, I got you. Well, the bottom line is no place is perfect, which isn't to say that some places aren't excellent and worthy of your consideration, right?
And I think you might have used this term before in print, where you called it like Catholic Disneyland. It seems like something you would say. I know you call it Traddie-Land, so that's kind of the same thing. But this is like Traddie-Land. It's used the most traddiest place on earth, or I just want to give it a twist on that Disneyland slogan, the happiest place on earth. It's the trad Catholicest place on earth, which would almost seem like mockery, like I'm calling it Disneyland, and in a way I would be, because it is a bit artificial. All these people coming here, and when you're there, if you grow up there, I don't think you're going to get something for nothing. Okay, so you're not going to get the ability to deal with non-Catholics the way you would if you grew up in Seguin, Texas, or somewhere else, or Maine, or somewhere where there's not hundreds and thousands of Catholics all around you. So you don't get something for nothing. And these people who grew up in St. Mary's, they're probably I'm not saying they're cooked. I'm not going that far, but they're eventually going to have to learn what the rest of us have learned. When we ever leave St. Mary's, if they ever leave St. Mary's, they're either going to crash and burn, or they're going to have to learn the skills that you and I and everyone else not living in St. Mary's had to learn long ago.
Sure. Well, the bottom line, there are pros and cons to every situation. Yeah. And you have to, basically write them out, think them out, talk them out as a family, and decide, what is best for you and those you're responsible for, right? And like, I can't decide that for anybody else. I can only decide it for myself. And certainly having a concentration of people who are trying to live according to a certain code of life, it provides that social assistance and support that you need. And that's true even if you're not talking Catholicism, right? If you just, any group, right? If you have a group that is basically more or less agreed on worldview or a way to do things, obviously more people you have trying to do that same thing, the better.
And this is also a good example of the phenomenon that I've described to people in the past, which I first experienced in Wisconsin and places like that, where I met large families, traditional Catholic, very good traditional Catholic. Like, they were supporting, the hardcore traditional Catholics, like SSPX at the time. This was like in 2003. But families, and then none of them, they might not even have been online, much less on forums or dating sites. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, just because you could sign up for every dating site that exists, even like all the good Catholic ones, if they exist, and you probably would not be able to contact some of the people I saw. And I didn't go door to door visiting everybody. I visited a few families. One family I knew from like 20 years in the past, and I bet you most of their kids are not active online. So, in fact, one of them had one computer in their living room. They weren't a computer family. So, again, I have to repeat, those of you who think, there's no good trads left or there's no good girls out there, not online. And even if you download Catholic Match and traditional Catholic singles, I don't know what else is, Sedevacanta singles, I don't know what's out there.
Right.
or I think there's some groups on Facebook, because I've encountered them when I'm searching for Catholic. Just the word Catholic, a lot of them come up and they describe what they are. And there's dozens. I mean, there's a whole bunch. I'm like, I'm not going to join that one. I don't think they want married men to join. I'll have to, because I'm joining some of these so I can post links. I'm mostly using them for advertising. But so there's Facebook groups. There's probably very small websites and dating sites for traditional Catholics. You could probably find them if you Google it. But I'm just telling you that even if you go there and get all of them and sign up for all of them and fill out profiles on all of them, however much that costs, however much time that costs, you still are probably missing a huge percent of the, well brought up, good, chaste, 18, around 18-year-old or very young, unmarried Catholic ladies. And I'm not talking about single mothers or anything like that. We're talking, what you're looking for, cream of the crop, all that good stuff. And so you have to remember that with traditional Catholics, a lot of them aren't online because they were raised a certain way. They're more old fashioned in many ways, especially socially, and some of their cultures, it doesn't line up with the modern world. They don't have smartphones, or they're not on social media. And so you just have to go where they are. So a lot of people come to places like St. Mary's hoping to find a spouse. And, there's no guarantees. Even when you come to St. Mary's, it's still work. I mean, you still have to put yourself out there. You got to, you have to be something, especially men. Men have to, they have to deliver the goods, or they're not going to get much attention. They're not going to be appreciated. Your mother will love you no matter what you do. That's about the end of the list. Men learn that early on. That how does it go?
It's called reality.
Yeah. It's. Have you heard the expression? It's like men. It's like women, dogs, and children are loved unconditionally, but men have to. Men based on what they provide, or something like that. Or it sounds harsh, but it's kind of true. I mean. Just because your mother loves you and thinks you're handsome and all this, a man figures out very quickly that as soon as he leaves his house, that doesn't work anymore. You gotta be excellent in something. You have to excel. You have to have mastered various things. You have to suck it up. You have to gain levels. What do they call it? Grind. You have to do the grind and you basically level up a bunch of times, and that's pretty much what you have to do. Otherwise, how are you any better than the guy next to you? Because and I suppose that works both ways. I mean, there's a lot of single men out there, and there's a lot of single women. But why should you pick this particular one? There has to be some kind of a connection. There has to be some kind of compatibility with, particularly with culture. How were you raised? Sure. I thought about that a bit when I was there, because there are different cultures. Not just like ethnically, but also just how you were raised. If you were raised with more money, if you were raised with more technology, if you're from a nerd household, you might not, there's some trad households that don't even have a computer and they have no use for them. How would a software developer guy fit in with such a family? I mean, it's maybe not a match made in heaven, If you spend all your time with Arduinos and you have more computers in your house than you have people, you might want to find a trad who's a little more okay with computers not being from the devil, because there are a variety of trads. There's definitely a variety. And see, these trads come from all around. Their backgrounds are completely different ethnic backgrounds. I mean, obviously St. Mary's is very white. So I say ethnic, as in like different European countries and different cultures that are more or less, they're very compatible with each other, but there's some variety and just the way people live their lives. And it got me thinking a lot about what we might have to do. We have an increasing number of kids who have graduated high school. Now we're up to 2. And, for things like friends and future spouses, I mean, where are they going to find it? We're very isolated here in Texas. There's only so many places. But on the other hand, I don't believe in just uprooting. I mean, there's something to be said for roots, because like where we live here, it's not just that we've lived here, I've been here for about 21 years. My wife's been here forever, but her ancestors have been here for several generations. on one of her sides, on her mother's side, they came here like in the 1860s. They were the first Texans to land on the Gulf Coast, and they settled these towns like New Braunfels and New Berlin and all these places. Her family's part of that, so she belongs here. I mean, and our kids were born here, so they're just the latest chapter of that. So we have roots here, and so going to St. Mary's, because St. Mary's has lots of trads. I mean, maybe go there for a while, maybe meet someone, but then you got to decide where you're going to live. You know, you're going to live there, or you're going to live back where your family is. And see, those are the questions I think traditional Catholics should be discussing, not baptism of desire, which is, I think it's a waste of time. I mean, who doesn't know that you need to get baptized? I've never had a traditional Catholic say, yeah, I believe in baptism of desire. So I met this guy, he wants to be a Catholic. But I told him, hey, if you're just a good person, you're good to go. Baptism of desire, baby. I've never met that anywhere. I just don't see it's an issue. As far as I know, when someone wants to be a Catholic, they go meet the priest. The priest tells them they have to be baptized. End of story. I just hate useless academic discussions. There's so many things like we discuss here that are so important. Things like how to raise your family, how to find a spouse, how to deal with the modern world, how to find the truth about these different things. So many bigger fish to fry. I mean, just the topic of culture. I mean, even among traditional Catholics, you have all these things that could kind of divide Catholics. You know, our attitude toward technology, our attitude toward what jobs are acceptable for a trad and which ones are not. Because the list gets longer all the time of the ones we really have to avoid. Or how can we make some of these jobs acceptable? I mean, those are topics that are interesting. Because those
or if you're interested in something, maybe see if you can't find somebody who does it and has done it for a while and get real personal intel from somebody before you make a decision. And then on the practical stuff that you'll get here, you need some lead, you need some food. If you've got 1,000-gallon tank in the back, maybe throw some extra diesel in there. Like that is vital to our reality right now, is grasping that it's basically a controlled demolition of everything all around us. And it's picking up speed. I mean, as far as picking up and moving your family, I mean, one thing you got to consider, are there any data centers around there? Yeah. Are there any proposed data centers? Or if you live somewhere where one is there and it's turning your electric and water into a total joke and perhaps a dangerous one, maybe you consider relocating for that reason. Because, I mean, how many, was it 50,000 homes in Lake Tahoe? We're just told a couple months back, in a year you'll have no electricity and water. You can't even sell that house. Who's going to buy it? BlackRock? Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's exactly who's going to buy it, just like they bought everything, so. But you definitely got to consider, many things, including, like you say, like cultural fit. And, do I have a reasonable degree of confidence that while doing this work, I can, maintain a good Catholic life? Or will it be something that will militate against it a little too much to make it more of a challenge than I want or is responsible for me to accept? There are no easy answers on any of this stuff, right? Because anywhere you go in the modern world, heck, even anywhere you would go in the world before the modern insanities, it can be a dangerous place. That being said, God provides us all the helps that we need. Certainly in places like a St. Mary's or somewhere where you can get daily mass, that's a big, big bonus. A lot of us do not have it. Much of the world doesn't have it at all. Despite the growth of tradition throughout the recent decades, the vast majority of the world still has nothing. And will probably continue to have nothing all the way until whatever happens to resolve this situation, because it's clearly a big part of whatever it is that God is orchestrating for our own personal and collective, purification to where he believes that we are now in a proper mindset to offer the sacrifice with the right spirit. Because obviously there was something about what we were doing and how we were doing it that was displeasing. I mean, it has to be, right? Because you don't just take away something like that for nothing. If you go back to the Old Testament, God got tired. The men were basically, it was all lip service. It was lip service, so, off to Babylon. And clearly, the 50s and, before, there had to have been just a growing aspect of mere lip service that, just wasn't going to be accepted anymore.
Yeah, and on that note, that's kind of one of the downsides of St. Mary's is putting yourself in such a place where everything seems to be okay, not even just having their mass, but even if you believe that there's a crisis in the church and a crisis of, morality, the priesthood, the Catholic faith in general, but you have all of that fixed when you're in St. Mary's. So day in, day out, being in that kind of environment, it would convince you that maybe the crisis is over. Because for you, it is. In your bubble of St. Mary's, in your Catholic Disneyland that you exist in, the crisis is essentially over. And that could be a problem because we need to have, we need to be plugged into reality where we know that we're in crisis of the church, that the majority of the world doesn't even have access to a Tridentine Mass, much less a daily or even weekly one. So I think it's better to just have that. You need to at least remember that if you're in St. Mary's, you're in a very special situation. You need to remind yourself every day about what other people have, because it's almost going to brainwash you into thinking everything's fine, because everything's fine. Whenever you open your eyes, everything's fine. You let your kids play outside until dark, until the lights come on, and then they come home. You can do that in St. Mary's. I mean, it's very low crime, and it's like something out of the 50s, but it's not the 50s though. It's 50s. Only a lot of people have internet and there's smartphones, and the world's out here. The 2026 world is just right outside the borders, and that's different from the 50s. So you got to keep that in mind. The other thing, I've been interested in human nature and modern culture and the modern world for a long time, since I was a seminarian, really. And so I keep an eye on what the modern world is doing, the errors of it, the errors that come from it, and the people, all the various collateral damage, what these modern people are doing. And I probably have a bit of a morbid interest in it, some might say. But here's the reality. I would prefer to study trads that much. I'd like to share trad anecdotes, and that's why I have CathInfo. I mean, I've liked discussing things, CathInfo-like topics, since 2005 or so. That's why I started CathInfo, because I like sharing these things with other trads. But I would much prefer to have case studies on trads, how they're making a living, trads, how they're struggling, trad relationships or trad marriages, the struggles and things, trad teenagers, their relationship issues and challenges and whatever, and trad, children and teens growing up in the world. I'd love to hear more from trads. The problem is there just isn't as much data to be had. You can't just open up your browser and plug into that as easy as you can with people in the world. So if I want to know what's going on out there in the world, the most I can get is the world in general, and then I have to do a massive filter and figure out how much of that you think has filtered down through the sieve into the world of tradition. So you watch some of the worst examples of what the modern world people are doing, whether it's modern women or modern men or whatever. Obviously, the worst cases, you're probably not going to see too much of that in tradition, and I know that. But there's other things that are maybe more widespread, that are maybe a little less crazy to think that at least a light version of these errors and these tendencies and these habits might have percolated through even into traditional families, just because the modern world only has one internet. It only has one United States of America. We only have one Spotify, one YouTube. There's only one of some of these things. So certain influences are going to be the same on the trads as on the worldly people. unless they're, not, unless they're like working the fields all day or something, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
that's kind of that's something to keep in mind is in the topic of things that are of interest, things that are practical to discuss and waste your time on, talking to adults who, like adult men who have jobs. What did they do for a living? How did they find a job that was acceptable as a Catholic? How do they stay Catholic and keep a state of grace while working a job? Things like that. To me, that's interesting. I'd love to
Yeah.
hear men
Or
share.
where was the pitfall? Like, right? Like, if you experienced some sort of disaster through, a bad choice or something, that's also immensely helpful to share with a young man precisely so he can avoid it. It's like, don't do that. I thought it was going to be okay. It was a mess. Like if I was a young dude, that's exactly part of the picture that I would want to know. If I'm considering a field and somebody's actually done it and can testify that there's just too many, difficulties in it, well, cool. Then I can mark that one off and, you know, it helps me in my search. Positive stories and negative stories help or can help in the overall search for all sorts of things. Whether it's jobs, spouses, places to live, uh,
Yeah.
heck, chapels to go to, or whatever. I mean, there's an awful lot out there to consider as you're trying to navigate these most interesting times where it's not getting any easier. It's probably going to get notably harder and rather quickly, simply because of the fact that the ones orchestrating the controlled demolition of everything are clearly ramping it up, right? It's not just that they're building data centers. It's obviously like a massive and as fast paced as possible build out. The oil situation was just cranked up, boom, a huge X factor and fast. Numerous refineries getting blown up. There was just another one in Australia that I believe was connected to creating or processing ammonia. It's something connected to fertilizer, which is not my area of expertise by any means, but that's a huge factor that the average Bubis Americanus neither thinks about nor discusses with respect to the Middle East. Is it's not just the oil; it's all the other stuff connected to it. One of the most important of which pertains to fertilizing crops,
Yeah.
right? And the wheat crop that was planted in America this year was the same as it was in 1919, when there was roughly 25% as many people that lived here. And it was, that's not good. And it's not like, oh, that's okay because next year the crop's going to be, they're going to plant 6 times more. So no, they're not. They planted what they could plant with the fertilizer they had. Come harvest time, forget next year. Come harvest time, who's to say that what they planted will even give the yield they're hoping, or that they'll even be able to harvest it from the mechanistic standpoint, right? Like how they harvest with machines that use diesel. So
Yeah.
even if they're a perfect crop, if you get stuck harvesting it basically by hand, because if they don't have their machines, I'm pretty sure, without having visited a whole bunch of these people personally, I think you can pretty much take it to the bank. It's not like they've all got the old school manual tools that they could use in a difficult pinch.
Yeah.
It's either the machine or hand. And, if there's no fuel, well, then it's hand. And if it's hand, well, whatever they need to consume, they're going to consume themselves. And that's pretty much it. Because not only you have to harvest it with the modern machine, then you've got to distribute it with another modern machine that runs on the same fuel. So it's like, this is not super complicated to grasp that it may not be, as gnarly as it could be, but it could also be immeasurably more gnarly than most people have considered as of yet, and in a sense could even fathom, right? Because we are so used to living our entire lives within a system where, well, that doesn't happen. There's always stuff. Well, there's always stuff until there isn't stuff.
Yeah.
And we may very well be, moving very quickly toward there being no stuff. And so if there are vital things that you think you need to get for yourself, get them now if you have the capacity. If there are certain things that you use every day and you normally get a little bit when you go to the store, get a little more. Especially, if it's things that are vital to your overall health, maybe you need certain medicines or whatever. Get maybe 2, 3 or more times what you would usually get, because fast forward just a couple of months and you may not be able to get them at all. And so certain things that you might be like, well, we could really use this thing for a year if I've got the requisite replacement parts. You know what you do? You get them now if you can. I mean, look, I know this, but it's not like I've got a ton of money to get stuff. I have to make decisions based on my own situation. Well, what is it that I'm going to double up on? Or what is it that instead of ordering 1, I'm going to get 6? I can't do that with too many things. But whatever you can do it with, I would do it. Also because, the savings that you may have within the system, well, part of this grand old agenda is to, at some stage, basically switch everybody over to, the digital gulag and the digital currency and all this fun stuff, the techno gulag. And, if you've got tons of cash in the bank, what you really got is nothing. It belongs to the bank. It doesn't belong to you. That's always been true, but it'll be more painful. It'll be painfully true when they flip the switch, because that's it. You need to put it in. If I had more than I do, I would make sure that, I'll leave some in there to pay my bills through the system as it is. But, I get stuff, put it into precious metal, put it into something of value while I've got it, and can I make the exchange for it? Because that's all it is. It's a medium of exchange, nefarious though it may be. And, real hard goods are going to be absolutely vital.
See, traditionally, money was supposed to be a storehouse of value. So when it worked as money. But now, when money loses value just by time passing through inflation,
sure, by design,
kind of broken. It's broken. So now you have to hurry up and turn it into real things that do hold their value before you lose value. So, for example, however much money you had in the bank in 2020, you probably have, let's say you didn't spend any of it, you essentially lost half of it. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but whatever pile of cash you had in the bank, in the stock market, 401k, CDs, sure, cash, whatever, and not gold and silver and those things. No, that's totally different. But money, like US dollars, if you had money in USD, you can now buy about half the value that you could have bought 5 or 6 years ago. And that's a fact. That's what happened in inflation. Is the price
doing everything. Nothing but accelerating, right? The way it works toward the end of the process is it simply gets worse and worse and worse. Eventually, effectively parabolically, exponentially, whatever term you want to use.
That's the worst part. That haircut, that 50% haircut we all experienced on our savings, whether those savings were $1,000 or $1 million or something in between that. It's not over. It's going to happen again and again and again. So you want to prioritize things that are concrete, so whether it's whatever you find yourself spending money on, whatever, of course, it depends on who you are, what kind of property you have, how many buildings, how much land, things like that. But spare parts, for example, if you have a lot of acreage or you have a lot of buildings and you do a lot of weed whacking, you might want to get another weed whacker or two. Just keep them in the box, put them in a shed, because it'll cost you less to get them now than it will in a couple of years.
More of the weed whacking cord, more of so many different things. Plastic containers, like the number of things that are made from petroleum or the byproducts of the refining thereof is stunning. You know, a toothbrush, whatever. Not that you can't find very good natural versions of all of these things, although they frequently cost you more than the cheap petroleum stuff, which is part of the deal as well. But you know, if you think you might need a nice healthy supply of Ziploc bags, you know, they do come in handy. Maybe the freezer ones would be better to get, even if you intend to use them for a non-freezer situation, just because they're thicker, right? The mill is more heavyweight. You know, like where I live, okay, behind the computer is my little cabin. And it's an old cabin. It's got no foundation. It's a log cabin. And so you have to put a skirt up around the bottom in order to keep it, you know, basically livably warm. And, you know, that usually involves some insulation, some plywood, some plastic. Well, you know, every 1-2 years, depending on the spot and how much sun it gets, etc., you know, you have to get some more plastic. Well, if I want to be able to replace that, whether this summer or next, I got to make sure I get that now, because it's very likely not going to be available to get if I fast forward 6, 8, 9 months. But yet I've still got to have a skirt that keeps my house livably warm.
Yeah, I've heard that oil for your car, you know, like motor oil, is going to be supply soon. And right now you can get them. You can still get them for $20 or $22 a gallon. But imagine if in 6 months it's like 40 or 45 everywhere. Won't you wish that you had gotten a few, put them in your shed or your garage, whether it's for your mower, for your own car, if you can change the oil. I guess if you only do it at the oil change place, I guess it wouldn't do you a whole lot of good. But in a pinch, it would, you know, if you couldn't afford it otherwise, you know, you could always pay someone to help you, you know, hire someone if you had the oil, you know.
Well, at the very least, you'd save a few bucks simply by doing it now versus when the price will be higher. Because, you know, there's no doubt that it will be, right? That's just the way it works, even without the Middle East situation. You already had insane amounts of inflation, like you said, chipping away, where, you know, your $100 from 2020 is now, you know, essentially worth 50, we'll say, or 60. If you look at it the other way, if you go with the government numbers, if you type in $100 in 2020, the equivalent now, the computer will tell you $128.67. That's based on government numbers, which are, you know, clearly a lie.
Highly cooked, yeah.
But let's just be conservative and say, well, the reality is more like 140, 150. Okay, well, that process is going to continue, and the nature of it, which cannot actually be undone, is it will intensify. So you know, if you lost this much now, that's terrible. Yes, it is. Now you will lose the same amount in half the amount of time, or twice as much in the same amount of time, and pretty soon it just goes to where it's like, okay, dang, you know, now I know what Weimar Germany was dealing with. So you know, if you get some things now, at the very least, you're getting more for your money. You're saving more of your money that you will try to then use for other things, you know, moving forward when the prices for everything keep rising. And, you know, it's smart business, you know, smart decision making for your welfare and the welfare of those that you are responsible for.
And you know, my favorite kind of truths to uncover and conspiracies to look into are the ones that can be verified by a person by himself with common sense, own two eyes, mathematics. And this is one of them. There are things that we could be wrong about. You could say, hey, I think they're planning on doing World War III, but we just don't know. We can see what they're doing today. We can speculate about where it's going. We know what they've said in the past. And yeah, it's reasonable, our speculation oftentimes, but it's always speculation, and people can dismiss it as speculation. We just don't know. Whereas when we talk about what we just said just now about the debt money system, requiring as much money to be borrowed as like all the time before it. And so it goes to and then it goes parabolic. It goes to the moon, as they say, where it goes up, just straight up. That is where you have hyperinflation. And that's a simple, it's a passionless, just a rational, how to describe it. It's just mathematics. It's not angry. It's
cold
not
hard.
It's just
like a cold hard
calculated.
fact of the oil, right? If there are no more tankers coming out of the Middle East, that's it. Like you have the clock for this situation has started. Now, the clock is arguably, say, a little more crystal clear about what it says and how fast it's moving if you live in a place that has no oil of its own at all, which is why they've already started, rationing. America's situation, while not as bad as those, is not as good as some people might think or want to believe. We will, the problem is going to hit everybody because they want it to, right? Like they want to do that controlled demolition. And you think about, time frames and things about stuff. Having been watching this stuff since, like 2099, several things over the decades, it always struck me that how slow it moved compared to how I thought it would. Or how basically how much BS people were willing to continue swallowing, which has always been a big factor.
I thought the same thing.
But of late, what strikes me is kind of the opposite. Not about the BS part, although more people are having good conversations. I mean, I get drawn into the conversations table side all the time, with now about serious stuff that a few months ago, a few years ago, nobody would have talked about, which is very interesting. But and as opposed to those decades where everything went slower than I would have thought it would, now it's going faster than you might think the end process. I mean, they are moving as far as just the various laws, the data centers, the destruction of the way the modern world works. They're moving fast, and so fast that it is very difficult, even if it was your full-time job, to keep up with this stuff. And frankly, I think it would probably make most people a little too batty if they really tried to do so in a thorough manner, just because like, oh my gosh, there's just so much, do what you can, pray your rosary, obviously, but do what you can on a material level, and trust that it's not like God doesn't know exactly what's going on, and he's just as much in control at this moment as he was yesterday or 1,000 years ago or however many years from now, and he still has the same. I mean, he is the same, right? He is love. He's always doing good for men and seeking to reach all of us. But they're definitely cranking it up in a way that's kind of the opposite from my observations from, over 20 years ago, where I kept being surprised. Like, the math says this is toast, but they would just come up with a new, way to basically kick the can down the road, some new monster tool of fraud, that was able to keep the illusion going. But such is life. There was remind me again what you mentioned before we started talking.
You're talking about the mud flood thing.
Oh yeah. Where are we staying on time? I can't. So we got about.
It's a quarter after. We'll probably have to.
You want to touch upon
it? It's a lot to get into just in 10 minutes or whatever. So.
Yeah, we could do another. We could do another episode either this week or like we talked about. For those watching at home, we maybe just doing things a little more frequently. Maybe try and do twice a week if we can. They may be a little bit shorter shows, but twice a week, which could. I think I could see that being a beneficial thing for us and for anybody that kindly watches what we do.
But yeah, I guess as by way of a teaser, it's something I was introduced to a couple of years ago. It was in a flat Earth documentary, and actually, I looked at my notes from that documentary because what I had done was I took notes on all the documentaries, and I kept the good ones, and I kind of ditched the bad ones. But the bad ones, even I took notes on what was wrong with them,
Right.
what errors
Sure.
were in them, and such. Well, I remembered this one, and I was trying to find it. Well, I found the name of it, and I had bisected my notes into two files, the ones I deleted and the ones I kept. So it was in my deleted pile. And it's because it started out talking about this stuff which I had never heard of or thought about before. You know, the fact that so many of these old buildings are buried up to their like second floor. Like you have
Right.
to dig way, way down. And it's clearly a first floor entrance with ornate designs around the entrance and everything. But it's like underground now. It's crazy. I didn't know about that. So, but this movie or this particular documentary, and by the way, this is also before AI. I want to mention too, I was watching some videos on this topic, and a lot of them now are AI, just a bunch of AI slides, and even the narrator I think is AI. So it misses something. I get sick of listening to a clanker talk for an hour. It doesn't have the same. There's no soul there, like when a human's trying to convince you of something. You know, it makes more sense when humans talking. And I'm so sick of it's not this, it's that, you know, the way the clankers like to talk. They have this certain way of talking. It's not a documentary. It's a full exegesis of da 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 da. And they always, it's not this, it's that. You know, that's one of the big main patterns they keep on repeating. But anyhow, I found this old video. I actually downloaded the video again, and I actually clicked around on it. The first hour and a half, I think, were quite good. But here's one of the things I actually want to talk about by way of big picture on this is when you're looking for the truth, is it reasonable that a person could have truths on A, B, and C, but not D, E, and F? Or they have the truths on A, B, and C, and then they go off base and they go crazy after that. Those things are reasonable. I mean, who says that just because you were wrong about something, that everything else you held was bunk? It doesn't follow. And so this particular video, it made some really good points. It talked about the orphans in the 19th century. It talked about the disconnect and the contrast, the clash between these, you know, wonders of the modern, like seven wonders of the ancient world level, you know, architecture.
Sure.
Versus the people who are all around living in wooden houses, you know, with you know, even insulation in the attic. I mean, just like log cabins, basically. Just
the World's Fair we talked about. The World's Fair situation is definitely a little fishy.
Yeah, just Google the World's Fairs. I mean, we don't have those anymore, but they had like they were like futuristic, you know, moving sidewalks and stuff, and they probably had some kind of energy that we don't have anymore. Something with the ether. And, you know, the earth producing electricity. There's a lot of interesting topics there. So they kind of talked about a lot of that. But then they kind of went off and talked about the churches, and they talked about one of the things that always makes me cringe is when these people, they're seeking the truth. And so they're trying to connect dots, and they're English speakers. And so they start connecting the dots with patterns. They start doing false pattern recognition. So I took notes on this. They said they were talking about toroids, you know, like a donut shape, magnetic field, and they were saying so toroid, right? That's this important this energy thing, this important thing that we've lost. And then they talked about how creator and inquisitor and this. Oh, see, it all has tor. That stands for toroid. Ooh, I'm like, yeah, in English, the creator is from. You know, imperator, that's an ending in Latin. And then in Spanish, it's emperador, you know, it becomes ador. Matador is killer, you know, that kind of thing. And then, you know, so someone who's had a few languages, at least dabbled in some other languages, kind of rolls their eyes and cringes when people start, because I've seen it many times. I've seen like these truthers, and, you know, they're often of goodwill, but they're just kind of ignorant when it comes to language. It's like, yeah, it does sound just like it in English, except everyone doesn't speak the English, you know, they don't speak the right language, you know. I'm trying to think of a good way to mock, you know. Why don't you speak funny? You go up to, like, picture some English American who's totally ignorant coming up to a Mexican man and saying, well, why don't you talk right? You know, well, why do you talk so funny? And then he goes up to a Frenchman, you talk funny too. Why can't you talk right? Right being English, you know, that it's that kind of mentality. They act as if everyone's supposed to talk right by speaking English, American English, and any other language is just talking funny. It's like, how ignorant can you get? You know, I don't speak that many languages, and I know Spanish somewhat, and I know Japanese pretty well, but it was enough to teach me that everyone doesn't speak English, okay? But these people have kind of it's like they have a bias. They think that from the time of Adam and Eve, everyone spoke the English. And so it just doesn't make, you have to have some knowledge of etymology, where words come from, you know, to be able to do that. I mean, there is a place for that, you know, how the languages connect to each other and how they derive from each other. But if you don't know anything about other languages or any etymology, you got to. So I'm kind of at the stage where I'm going to acknowledge things that are true and things that, you know, have a good point without necessarily jumping to any truths that I don't know. You know what I mean? So in other words, I'm not at the stage where I could tell you what exactly happened in the 1800s, but there seems to be something going on. There does seem to be a real pattern of the establishment not wanting certain alternate histories or alternate, let's say, out of place artifacts to be known. Anytime they discover a giant, they always try to bury it. Anytime they find some kind of super awesome architecture that can't be explained, that we can't even do today, they tend to bury it. Sometimes literally.
Just because you don't have the answer doesn't mean you can't ask some questions or say, look, I don't know what the solution is, but it's pretty clear that there's some things here that don't quite add up. You know, and if I'm able to discover a few more facts over time, cool. If I'm not, because other things are more important or whatever, that's okay too. You know, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, for Catholics anyway, right? That should really make us even more grateful for the faith, right? Because that's the beauty and the gift of supernatural faith, is that I can know, even from an extremely young age, through my super basic catechism, you know, and even if I didn't have a book, through the words of my mother, my father, the priest, I can know sublime and like profoundly, eternally important truths, even though I may be dumb as a box of rocks. Everything else doesn't have that level of certitude, and a lot of it, you know, has a very kind of dubious, fluid level of certitude, and that's okay. You know, in order to save my soul, I don't have to know everything about everything on a natural level.
But on that note, it's not just that it doesn't matter for salvation, because that's true too, but just to not be afraid of the truth. You know, the fact that there were higher civilizations before the flood, that doesn't rock my world. I'm not afraid of that. I don't have to persecute anybody if they try to say that. It doesn't bother me. Since I have the truth, I already know there was a flood. I know there was great civilizations that God destroyed with the flood.
Sure. And it makes sense too, right? It makes sense that there would be greater ones when you think about the fact that Adam was created as a grown man, perfect, and his intellect, his body was immeasurably more vigorous than ours at this point in history, right?
Yeah, and people live longer, so they can master more things.
Yeah, you know, so there's all things about it that would make sense to me. Yeah, you know, things would be beautiful in many ways, far above what we are used to or could conceive during those initial days, years, centuries, you know. That's just the way it goes, you know. I mean, and that's a good thing.
But I think our freedom as Catholics is to not be afraid of the truth, because we're friends with God, who is the ultimate truth, and nothing's going to contradict that. Nope. And we don't have to be evil. We don't have to fear the truth in any form. We always welcome it. So we have a certain peace about it. It doesn't. But whereas you look at the bad guys, they freak out if something's going to come out. Well, look at like the Epstein class. Imagine how they would be shaking in their boots if people started caring and started coming after them. They'd have to run when no man pursueth, as Scripture says. The
Sure.
wicked man runs when no one's chasing him. That's what Scripture says about the wicked man. And we don't have to do that by following God and His law. We can, with perfect freedom, pursue the truth. We never have to jump to a conclusion that isn't there. We never have to be illogical or violate the truth in any way. We can just peacefully, oh, that looks true. I'm going to grab onto that. Let's see what else is true, and just explore things. And it's kind of satisfying. See, the human brain our reason was created for truth, just like our will was created for good. And so we get all these, it's kind of like a dopamine hit, only different. It's like it tastes good to our reason every time we chomp down on some truth. And we get to do that again and again because we already got the full, the big picture is God is true, and the Catholic faith is a true faith, and that there was a flood. Everything in Scripture is true, for example. So once you have that, everything else, we don't have to fear that the world's going to be blown up by a rogue meteor, or that the aliens are going to invade us, or that AI is going to take us over and destroy us, or that climate change is going to destroy the world. We don't have to fear any of those things because we have the faith, because we know how the world's going to end. God's going to destroy the world by fire. Now, not He's going to destroy the world with nuclear bombs. No, that would be man destroying the world with his own power. No, it said God will destroy the world. He will judge the world by fire. It says, et seculum per ignes. That means in the world by fire. That's in the old doxology that's said at baptism. It's at the exorcism of the salt. I think it's in the baptismal rite, and it's in many other places. It goes back to the earliest days of the church. So we know that the earth is going to be destroyed by fire by God. He will judge the world by fire. So it frees us from fear. It doesn't make us afraid, and so. I think it's very satisfying, the more truths you can grab onto, because then you're existing in a world that lines up with reality, that there's none of that cognitive dissonance. And I think that's good for peace of soul, just to never be surprised about something you're seeing. Because think of how, even when the way these bad guys behave, we've come to know how they act. We acknowledge what they are and how they act. And so when they do something, we're like, yeah, they're doing that again. Okay, let's do it. I know what to do now. And we're not going to freak out. And remember, in survivalism, all the hardcore survivalists will tell you the number one thing you have to do to be prepared is to be psychologically prepared. Because apparently you could have a lot of material things in a bunker, but if you're not psychologically ready for it, you would actually be like a deer in the headlights, like staring off into space when the crap hits the fan. You wouldn't know what to do. It sounds unbelievable, but everyone says it. Everyone who's worked in the military and who knows what they're talking about in the survivalist world, they all say the same thing, that if you aren't psyched up to know this is likely to happen, or so you're not prepared for it, you're just going to be catatonic. You'll just
the key, you have to stay calm and make good decisions, right? Yeah. And that's true even of just like an intense day at work, right? It's just and that's why I have confidence that even a lot of people that may not have the greatest awareness right now of certain things, if they in the main tend to stay calm and make good decisions, things will probably go well for them, at least reasonably well, because that is the key kind of a disposition. Not only for yourself, especially if you're responsible for others, right? If you flip out and people are depending upon you, what do you think they're going to do? Whereas if you remain calm, even if they're a little stressed, they're going to take your lead, and they're at least going to calm down a little bit compared to what they were. That's why the old saying, the organization takes on the character of the head. That doesn't matter whether the organization is big or small, new or old, temporary or long-lived. That's just the way it is. And if you can remain calm and, make good decisions, It'll be all right.
And the best part is it doesn't cost anything. Anyone has the time to meditate a few minutes and just, realize how the world is made. Just being plugged into an accurate model of reality in your head so that your conception of reality matches as closely as possible what's actually out there in the real world. That alone will mean you're not going to be surprised or taken by unawares, because you know how the world works, who runs the world, what they have planned, et cetera, so that when something happens, it's all okay. I saw this coming, and you just start calmly, coolly, rationally dealing with it. And that's something that anyone can afford. I mean, it doesn't cost money to be psychologically prepared for like a collapse or a war or hyperinflation or any of those things. Even if you can't prepare as well right now materially as you would like, at least you're psychologically preparing yourself. And that will put you ahead of a surprising number of people. Now, don't take that as an excuse to be lax on your material preparations if you can do more. But it is the number one thing you have to do, is just because these people a lot of them aren't, the model of reality in their head is so off compared to the real world that there's this cognitive dissonance, and things are going to happen in the real world that don't line up with what they thought the world was. And they're not going to, they're going to have like a, blue screen of death, does not compute, they're going to start glitching, as it were. And so you don't want to be one of those, because they're really the most miserable. I mean, how do you get more miserable than unable to deal with the world or unable to deal with life? And there's a lot of people, especially of the younger generations, that they're not made of, they're not raised as well. They're not given as many opportunities to experience real life. And so, everything from having to work a 9-to-5 job is almost too much for some of them, so you don't want to be like that. We need to exercise ourselves, practice mortification, and become strong and, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, those kind of things. Psychologically, we should have some strength, some inner strength. And then that's a huge chunk of what you will need to survive anything, because there's a lot of, if you're the type who's, thus strong in all those ways I just listed, even if you had nothing, you're going to have such an edge, because you're going to be calm and collected. You'll say, okay, I don't have this. Let's get in the car, or let's go walking. I'm going to head for the veterinary shop nearby and break in and get all their stuff, because the pharmacies are going to be cleared out. Just knowing a few things, being more calm and collected. Okay, if something just happened, I need to fill the bathtub with water so we have drinking water. Little things like that. They're going to spell the difference between survival and destruction. All because you could keep your head. So I can't emphasize enough that even though it seems so basic and seems so simple and so like nothing, it is actually quite important. And it's one of the many gifts, as I've said many times, that we Catholics can enjoy. Because it's really hard to draw a line between the truth, God who is truth, and all the other truths. They're very, because God is also existence, reality, existence, what is God. It's very closely related. If you get in a habit of loving God, you're going to love what is. You're going to love what is reality. You're going to love what is true again and again. And so, like, coming back to this particular mystery that I've been kind of fascinated by this last week or so, about all these awesome, like, these train stations, and I think some of them they're saying they're big enough to be like a Zeppelin airport, and there's evidence that Zeppelins were doing, having service, flying before they were officially doing it, like as early as the 1940s or 1840s. And these buildings, look at the pictures. They're like, the ceilings dwarf the people standing on the floor of them are like ants, and the ceiling's way up here. I mean, it's insane. And so I acknowledge that. I'm like, so the truth is, that's crazy. Something's weird there. That's true. And I'm not going to deny that just because I don't have all the answers, or just because I don't like where the answers are going, or I don't know, I can't solve the mystery yet. I'm going to acknowledge in any piece of thing that's any piece of evidence that seems true. You don't ever want to reject truth. If something seems true to you, you'll say, yeah, that looks normal. No, it doesn't. Don't lie. Don't lie to yourself. I don't know why it's like that. Maybe there's some other explanation, but for just looking at that picture, it sure is curious that so many buildings are buried up to their second floor. That's a fact that's weird. Okay, well, can we all agree that that's kind of weird? And that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm trying to convince you of, is that it's kind of weird, and there's got to be an explanation, a good explanation. And when I hear a ridiculous explanation, I can call that out as well. It's like, I don't know about that. I'm going to say I don't know about that, because that seems to be the truest thing to say, Sure. And so with everything else, there's many other things going on in the world right now, many other errors. But it's funny how all the errors hang together. I've actually seen memes that go down the errors, and they embrace all of them. Have you seen the one that says the Earth is a globe, evolution is real, climate change is real, unborn babies are clumps of cells, that they just go on down the line. It's like kind of curious that you're getting everything wrong at once. It's like they say, like, God doesn't exist. I think it was one of them. Religion is a scam or something. But they have all those on there. It's like, why are all the errors like a package deal? I've heard of trads who have left the faith, or no, I shouldn't say that. They've left tradition. And there was one family I heard of. They went back to the Novus Ordo. Okay, so they left tradition. They went to the Novus Ordo. What would you assume about them? You'd assume, okay, maybe they don't like tradition. Maybe the traditional Catholics are too weird or whatever. Maybe they just don't like the Mass in Latin. Maybe they want to be more mainstream. Okay, those things I can kind of understand. But why would you then enroll your kids in public school after they were at a nice private school where they were learning much better and had a much better classroom situation and whatnot? Why would your kids start dyeing their hair, to be like them? And this is a real case, by the way. It's right. Like left the Tridentine Mass. Now you don't want your kids to be happy either. You don't want your kids to be happily married. You want your kids to join TikTok and end up have your daughters end up 47-year-old cat ladies, unmarried and with a high body count. I mean, you want all that now just because you gave up the Latin Mass? That doesn't make sense. If I gave up the Latin Mass, I would still want to be happy in this world. I mean, it's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like truth and error kind of hang together. It's like once you abandon the truth, which is the Tridentine Mass, it's like they don't know where to stop. They just kind of roll down until they end up in the gutter. I mean, and I was talking to someone about it, and they said, well, maybe those people never really accepted all those other things. Maybe they never chose to dress modestly or to be conservative. Maybe they just joined, this Catholic school or whatever, or they went to this Catholic traditional chapel and they liked it or whatever, and they just kind of tried to fit in as much as possible. And as soon as they left that chapel, well, then they just give it all up. I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense a little bit. But still, if that family was there for like 15 years or 10 years, I don't remember how much this particular family was there. But when you've been there that long, you've seen the wholesomeness of the traditional Catholic families and the happiness and living in nature, away from the big city, and all these choices they've made, the women being more feminine, and they get treated more feminine by the men are gentlemen, all this whole package that we've experienced as traditional Catholics. You've seen that. You leave because you got mad at somebody, or you leave because you want to go back to the Novus Ordo. It's like, why do you all of a sudden want what is bad for your family now? Don't you want your kids to have a good education now? Don't you want them to save their souls anymore? I mean, because again, there's a lot of people homeschooling, for example, who aren't even Catholic, who aren't even Christian. There's people leaving the public schools and they're trying to homeschool their kids because they don't like what the public schools have become. They don't like the bullying. They don't like the nonsense going on. And this is in Texas. The nearby city, the closest city to me, Seguin, Texas, I think 1/3 of the people living there have only been there for 5 years or less. Yeah. And the number of homeschooling families in Seguin has gone up immensely. And a lot of them aren't even what you would consider traditional homeschoolers. They're not religious. They don't have big families. They just
have enough sense to realize that the government indoctrination centers are so egregious that they want to get their kids out.
Yeah, and so I mean, there's an example. So if you can not even be a Catholic and see that you should take your kids out of the public school and homeschool them, meanwhile you have someone who left the traditional world, went back to the Novus Ordo, which is technically supposed to be Catholic, right? They're supposed to be still serving God. They just don't like the Latin Mass. It's just about the language the Mass is in, right? But they're going to the Novus Ordo, and they are dumber than an atheist. They're signing their kids up for public school. My brain just mind blown.
Here's the reality. If you want some answers, you got to sit down and ask them. Otherwise, you're just never going to know. But you don't need to know in order to do what you need to do. You want to make a tentative date to talk about some mud flood and related things next time at a little greater length? And we'll have a few updates about Israel and Iran and good old Trumpenstein.
Yeah, we'll cover all those things too.
Yeah, and $1 billion deals. We'll talk about Jared Kushner and buying islands off of Albania, and all these scum suckers who think and about Peter Thiel, Mr. Whack-a-Job himself, who can't even answer basic questions without sweating and looking rather smarmy. He moved to Argentina. All the big boys have got their underground bunkers. Whatever. You can run, but you can't hide.
Yep.
But
there's still more.
We appreciate everybody watching us once again. Sorry we've been away for a while, but we're putting together a little plan to be a little more frequent, even if slightly shorter, which could probably be better for both us and for you as the viewer. But God bless everybody, and thank you for watching us once again. Please keep us in your prayers, and we shall do the same for you. Any final words for the folks at home, Matthew?
Just see you all next time, and we look forward to your continued patronage of our podcasts. We'll keep them coming.
Sounds good, my friend. I'll talk to you again soon.